JPEG.
In computing, JPEG is a commonly used method of lossy compression for digital images, particularly for those images produced by digital photography. The degree of compression can be adjusted, allowing a selectable trade-off between storage size and image quality. JPEG typically achieves 10:1 compression with little perceptible loss in image quality. JPEG compression is used in a number of image file formats. JPEG Exif is the most common image format used by digital cameras and other photographic image capture devices. Along with JPEG JFIF, it is the most common format for storing and transmitting photographic images on the World Wide Web. These format variations are often not distinguished, and are simply called JPEG. The term JPEG is an acronym for the Joint Photographic Experts Group, which created this standard. The MIME media type for JPEG is image JPEG, defined in RFC 1341, except in Internet Explorer, which provides a MIME type of image pjpeg when uploading JPEG images. JPEG JFIF supports a maximum image size of 65,535 x 65535.
The JPEG standard.
The name JPEG stands for Joint Photographic Experts Group, the name of the committee that created the JPEG standard and also other still picture coding standards. The Joint stood for ISO TC 97WG8 and CCITTSGVIII. In 1987 ISO TC 97 became ISO IEC-JTC1 and in 1992 CCITT became ITUT. Currently on the JTC1 side, JPEG is one of two subgroups of ISO IEC Joint Technical Committee 1, Subcommittee 29, Working Group 1, ISO IEC-JTC1/SC29/WG1, titled as Coding of Still Pictures. On the ITUT side, ITUT-SG16 is the respective body. The original JPEG group was organized in 1986, issuing the first JPEG standard in 1992, which was approved in September 1992 as ITUT Recommendation T81 and in 1994 as ISO IEC 10918-1. The JPEG standard specifies the codec, which defines how an image is compressed into a stream of bytes and decompressed back into an image, but not the file format used to contain that stream. The Exif and JFIF standards define the commonly used file formats for interchange of JPEG compressed images. JPEG standards are formally named as Information Technology, Digital Compression and Coding of Continuous Tone Still Images. ISO IEC 10918 consists of the following parts. ECMA International Trail/98 specifies the JPEG file interchange format, JFIF. The first edition was published in June 2009.
Typical usage.
The JPEG compression algorithm is at its best on photographs and paintings of realistic scenes with smooth variations of tone and color. For web usage, where the amount of data used for an image is important, JPEG is very popular. JPEG Exif is also the most common format saved by digital cameras. On the other hand, JPEG may not be as well suited for line drawings and other textual or iconic graphics, where the sharp contrasts between adjacent pixels can cause noticeable artifacts. Such images may be better saved in a lossless graphics format such as TIFF, GIF, PNG, or a raw image format. The JPEG standard actually includes a lossless coding mode, but that mode is not supported in most products. As a typical use of JPEG is a lossy compression method, which somewhat reduces the image fidelity, it should not be used in scenarios where the exact reproduction of the data is required, such as some scientific and medical imaging applications and certain technical image processing work. JPEG is also not well suited to file that will undergo multiple edits, as some image quality will usually be lost each time the image is decompressed and recompressed, particularly if the image is cropped or shifted, or if encoding parameters are changed. See Digital Generation Loss for details. To avoid this, an image that is being modified or may be modified in the future can be saved in a lossless format, with a copy exported as JPEG for distribution.
JPEG compression.
JPEG uses a lossy form of compression based on the discrete cosine transform, DCT. This mathematical operation converts each frame field of the video source from the spatial, 2D, domain into the frequency domain, also known as transform domain. A perceptual model based loosely on the human psychovisual system discards high-frequency information, that is sharp transitions in intensity and color hue. In the transform domain, the process of reducing information is called quantization. In simpler terms, quantization is a method for optimally reducing a large number scale, with different occurrences of each number, into a smaller one, and the transform domain is a convenient representation of the image because the high-frequency coefficients, which contribute less to the overpicture than other coefficients, are characteristically small values with high compressibility. The quantized coefficients are then sequenced and losslessly packed into the output bit stream. Nearly all software implementations of JPEG permit user control over the compression ratio, as well as other optional parameters, allowing the user to trade off picture quality for smaller file size. In embedded applications, such as Mini-DV, which uses a similar DCT compression scheme, the parameters are pre-selected and fixed for the application. The compression method is usually lossy, meaning that some original image information is lost and cannot be restored, possibly affecting image quality. There is an optional lossless mode defined in the JPEG standard. However, this mode is not widely supported in products. There is also an interlaced progressive JPEG format, in which data is compressed in multiple passes of progressively higher detail. This is ideal for large images that will be displayed while downloading over a slow connection, allowing a reasonable preview after receiving only a portion of the data. However, support for progressive JPEGs is not universal. When progressive JPEGs are resentenced by programs that do not support them, such as versions of Internet Explorer before Windows 7, the software only displays the image after it has been completely downloaded. There are also many medical imaging and traffic systems that create in-process 12-bit JPEG images, normally grayscale images. The 12-bit JPEG format has been part of the JPEG specification for some time, but this format is not as widely supported.
Lossless editing.
A number of alterations to a JPEG image can be performed losslessly, that is, without recompression and the associated quality loss, as long as the image size is a multiple of 1 MCU block, minimum coded unit, usually 16 pixels in both directions, for 420 chroma subsampling. Utilities that implement this include Jectron, with user interface Jcrop, and the JPG transform plugin to Earthworm View. Blocks can be rotated in 90-degree increments, flipped in the horizontal, vertical and diagonal axes and moved about in the image. Not all blocks from the original image need to be used in the modified one. The top and left edge of the JPG image must lie on a 8x8 pixel block boundary, but the bottom and right edge need not do so. This limits the possible lossless crop operations, and also prevents flips and rotations of an image whose bottom or right edge does not lie on a block boundary for all channels, because the edge would end up on top or left, where, as aforementioned, a block boundary is obligatory. When using lossless cropping, if the bottom or right side of the crop region is not on a block boundary, then the rest of the data from the partially used blocks will still be present in the cropped file and can be recovered. It is also possible to transform between baseline and progressive formats without any loss of quality, since the only difference is the order in which the coefficients are placed in the file. Furthermore, several JPG images can be losslessly joined together, as long as the edges coincide with block boundaries.
JPEG files.
The file format known as JPG Interchange Format, JFIF, is specified in Annex B of the standard. However, this pure file format is rarely used, primarily because of the difficulty of programming encoders and decoders that fully implement all aspects of the standard and because of certain shortcomings of the standard. Color space definition, component subsampling registration, pixel aspect ratio definition. Several additional standards have evolved to address these issues. The first of these, released in 1992, was JPEG File Interchange Format, or JFIF, followed in recent years by exchangeable image file format, Exif, and ICC color profiles. Both of these formats use the actual JPeg byte layout, consisting of different markers, but in addition employ one of the JPeg standards extension points, namely the application markers. JFIF use APPO, while Exif use APP1. Within these segments of the file, that were left for future use in the JPeg standard and are read by it, these standards add specific metadata. Thus, in some ways JFIF is a cut-down version of the JPeg standard in that it specifies certain constraints, such as not allowing all the different encoding modes, while in other ways it is an extension of JPeg due to the added metadata. The documentation for the original JFIF standard states, image files that employ JPEG compression are commonly called JPG files, and are stored in variants of the JPeg image format. Most image capture devices, such as digital cameras, that output JPG are actually creating files in the Exif format, the format that the camera industry has standardized on for metadata interchange. On the other hand, since the Exif standard does not allow color profiles, most image editing software stores JPG in JFIF format, and also include the APP1 segment from the Exif file to include the metadata in an almost compliant way. The JFIF standard is interpreted somewhat flexibly. Strictly speaking, the JFIF and Exif standards are incompatible because they each specify that their marker segment, APPO or APP1, respectively, appears first. In practice, most JPG files contain a JFIF marker segment that precedes the Exif header. This allows older readers to correctly handle the older format JFIF segment, while newer readers also decode the following Exif segment, being less strict about requiring it to appear first.
JPG file and AM extensions.
The most common file and AM extensions for files employing JPG compression are JPG and JPEG, though JP, JFIF and JIF are also used. It is also possible for JPG data to be embedded in other file types. TIFF encoded files often embed a JPG image as a thumbnail of the main image. And MP3 files can contain a JPG of cover art in the ID3v2 tag.
Color profile.
Many JPG files embed an ICC color profile, color space. Commonly used color profiles include sRGB and Adobe RGB. Because these color spaces use a nonlinear transformation, the dynamic range of an 8-bit JPG file is about 11 stops. See gamma curve.
Syntax and structure.
A JPG image consists of a sequence of segments, each beginning with a marker, each of which begins with a 0xFF byte followed by a byte indicating what kind of marker it is. Some markers consist of just those 2 bytes. Others are followed by 2 bytes indicating the length of marker's specific payload data that follows. The length includes the 2 bytes for the length, but not the 2 bytes for the marker. Some markers are followed by entropy-coded data. The length of such a marker does not include the entropy-coded data. Note that consecutive 0xFF bytes are used as fill bytes for padding purposes, although this fill byte padding should only ever take place for markers immediately following entropy-coded scan data. See JPEG specification section B1.1.2 and E1.2 for details. Specifically in all cases where markers are appended after the compressed data, optional 0xFF fill bytes may precede the marker. Within the entropy-coded data, after any 0xFF byte, a 0x00 byte is inserted by the encoder before the next byte, so that there does not appear to be a marker where none is intended, preventing framing errors. Decoders must skip the 0x00 byte. This technique, called byte stuffing, see JPEG specification section F1.2.3, is only applied to the entropy-coded data, not to marker payload data. Note however that entropy-coded data has a few markers of its own. Specifically the reset markers, 0xD0 through 0xD7, which are used to isolate independent chunks of entropy-coded data to allow parallel decoding, and encoders are free to insert these reset markers at regular intervals, although not all encoders do this. There are other start-of-frame markers that introduce other kinds of JPG encodings. Since several vendors might use the same app and marker type, application-specific markers often begin with a standard or vendor name, for example, Exif or Adobe or some other identifying string. Add a restart marker, block-to-block predictor variables or reset, and the bitstream is synchronized to a byte boundary. Restart markers provide means for recovery after bitstream error, such as transmission over an unreliable network or file corruption. Since the runs of macro blocks between restart markers may be independently decoded, these runs may be decoded in parallel.
JPG codec example.
Although a JPG file can be encoded in various ways, most commonly it is done with JFIF encoding. The encoding process consists of several steps. The representation of the colors in the image is converted from RGB to YCBCR, consisting of one luma component, Y, representing brightness, and two chroma components, CB and CR, representing color. This step is sometimes skipped. The resolution of the chroma data is reduced, usually by a factor of 2. This reflects the fact that the eye is less sensitive to fine color details than to fine brightness details. The image is split into blocks of 8x8 pixels, and for each block, each of the Y, CB, and CR data undergoes the discrete cosine transform, DCT, which was developed in 1974 by Ahmed, T. Natarajan and K. R. Rao. See citation 1 in discrete cosine transform. A DCT is similar to a Fourier transform in the sense that it produces a kind of spatial frequency spectrum. The amplitudes of the frequency components are quantized. Human vision is much more sensitive to small variations in color or brightness over large areas than to the strength of high-frequency brightness variations. Therefore, the magnitudes of the high-frequency components are stored with a lower accuracy than the low-frequency components. The quality setting of the encoder, for example 50 or 95 on a scale of 0 to 100 in the independent JPG group's library, affects to what extent the resolution of each frequency component is reduced. If an excessively low quality setting is used, the high-frequency components are discarded altogether. The resulting data for 8 Albanian XX8 blocks is further compressed with a lossless algorithm, a variant of Huffman encoding. The decoding process reverses these steps, except the quantization because it is irreversible. In the remainder of the section, the encoding and decoding processes are described in more detail.
Encoding.
Many of the options in the JPG standard are not commonly used, and as mentioned above, most image software uses the simpler JFIF format when creating a JPG file, which among other things specifies the encoding method. Here is a brief description of one of the more common methods of encoding when applied to an input that is 24 bits per pixel, 8 each of red, green, and blue. This particular option is a lossy data compression method.
Color space transformation.
First, the image should be converted from RGB into a different color space called YCBCR, or, informally, YCBCR. It has 3 components Y, CB and CR. The Y component represents the brightness of a pixel, and the CB and CR components represent the chrominance, split into blue and red components. This is basically the same color space as used by digital color television as well as digital video including video DVDs, and is similar to the way color is represented in analog PAL video and Mac, but not by analog NTSC, which uses the YIQ color space. The YCBCR color space conversion allows greater compression without a significant effect on perceptual image quality, or greater perceptual image quality for the same compression. The compression is more efficient because the brightness information, which is more important to the eventual perceptual quality of the image, is confined to a single channel. This more closely corresponds to the perception of color in the human visual system. The color transformation also improves compression by statistical decorrelation. A particular conversion to YCBCR is specified in the JFIF standard, and should be performed for the resulting JPG file to have maximum compatibility. However, some JPEG implementations in highest quality mode do not apply this step and instead keep the color information in the RGB color model, where the image is stored in separate channels for red, green and blue brightness components. This results in less efficient compression, and would not likely be used when file size is especially important.
Downsampling.
Due to the densities of color and brightness-sensitive receptors in the human eye, humans can see considerably more fine detail in the brightness of an image, the Y component, than in the hue and color saturation of an image, the CB and CR components. Using this knowledge, encoders can be designed to compress images more efficiently. The transformation into the YCB-CR color model enables the next usual step, which is to reduce the spatial resolution of the CB and CR components, called downsampling or chroma subsampling. The ratios at which the downsampling is ordinarily done for JPG images are 4:4:4, no downsampling, 4:2:2, reduction by a factor of 2 in the horizontal direction, or, most commonly, 4:2:0, reduction by a factor of 2 in both the horizontal and vertical directions. For the rest of the compression process, Y, CB and CR are processed separately and in a very similar manner.
Block splitting.
After subsampling, each channel must be split into 8x8 blocks. Depending on chroma subsampling, this yields minimum coded unit MCU blocks of size 8x8, 4:4:4, no subsampling, 16x8, 4:2:2, or most commonly 16x16, 4:2:0. In video compression, MCUs are called macro blocks. If the data for a channel does not represent an integer number of blocks, then the encoder must fill the remaining area of the incomplete blocks with some form of dummy data. Filling the edges with a fixed color, for example, black, can create ringing artifacts along the visible part of the border. Repeating the edge pixels is a common technique that reduces, but does not necessarily completely eliminate, such artifacts, and more sophisticated border filling techniques can also be applied.
Discrete cosine transform.
Next, each 8x8 block of each component, Y, CB, CR, is converted to a frequency domain representation using a normalized, two-dimensional type II discrete cosine transform, DCT, which was introduced by N. Ahmed, T. Natarajan and K. R. Rao in 1974. See citation 1 in discrete cosine transform. The DCT is sometimes referred to as type II DCT in the context of a family of transforms as in discrete cosine transform, and the corresponding inverse, IDCT, is denoted as type III DCT. As an example, one such 8x8 8-bit subimage might be. Before computing the DCT of the 8x8 block, its values are shifted from a positive range to one centered around 0. For an 8-bit image, each entry in the original block falls in the range. The midpoint of the range, in this case, the value 128, is subtracted from each entry to produce a data range that is centered around 0, so that the modified ranges. This step reduces the dynamic range requirements in the DCT processing stage that follows. Aside from the difference in dynamic range within the DCT stage, this step is mathematically equivalent to subtracting 1024 from the DC coefficient after performing the transform, which may be a better way to perform the operation on some architectures since it involves performing only one subtraction rather than 64 of them. This step results in the following values. The next step is to take the two-dimensional DCT, which is given by where is the horizontal spatial frequency, for the integers, is the vertical spatial frequency, for the integers, is a normalizing scale factor to make the transformation orthonormal, is the pixel value at coordinates, is the DCT coefficient at coordinates. If we perform this transformation on our matrix above, we get the following, rounded to the nearest 2 digits beyond the decimal point. Note the top left corner entry with a rather large magnitude. This is the DC coefficient. The remaining 63 coefficients are called the AC coefficients. The advantage of the DCT is its tendency to aggregate most of the signal in one corner of the result, as may be seen above. The quantization step to follow accentuates this effect while simultaneously reducing the overall size of the DCT coefficients, resulting in a signal that is easy to compress efficiently in the entropy stage. The DCT temporarily increases the bit depth of the data, Since the DCT coefficients of an 8-bit component image take up to 11 or more bits, depending on fidelity of the DCT calculation, to store. This may force the codec to temporarily use 16-bit bins to hold these coefficients, doubling the size of the image representation at this point. They are typically reduced back to 8-bit values by the quantization step. The temporary increase in size at this stage is not a performance concern for most JPG implementations, because typically only a very small part of the image is stored in full DCT form at any given time during the image encoding or decoding process.
Quantization.
The human eye is good at seeing small differences in brightness over a relatively large area, but not so good at distinguishing the exact strength of a high-frequency brightness variation. This allows one to greatly reduce the amount of information in the high-frequency components. This is done by simply dividing each component in the frequency domain by a constant for that component, and then rounding to the nearest integer. This rounding operation is the only lossy operation in the whole process, other than chroma subsampling, if the DCT computation is performed with sufficiently high precision. As a result of this, it is typically the case that many of the higher frequency components are rounded to 0, and many of the rest become small positive or negative numbers, which take many fewer bits to represent. The elements in the quantization matrix control the compression ratio, with larger values producing greater compression. A typical quantization matrix, as specified in the original JPG standard, is as follows. The quantized DCT coefficients are computed with, whereas the unquantized DCT coefficients is the quantization matrix above, and is the quantized DCT coefficients. Using this quantization matrix with the DCT coefficient matrix from above results in, for example, using -415, the DC coefficient, and rounding to the nearest integer.
Entropy coding.
Entropy coding is a special form of lossless data compression. It involves arranging the image components in a zigzag order employing run-length encoding (RLE) algorithm that groups similar frequencies together, inserting length coding zeros, and then using Huffman coding on what is left. The JPG standard also allows, but does not require, decoders to support the use of arithmetic coding, which is mathematically superior to Huffman coding. However, this feature has rarely been used as it was historically covered by patents requiring royalty-bearing licenses, and because it is slower to encode and decode compared to Huffman coding. Arithmetic coding typically makes files about 5 to 7% smaller. The previous quantized DC coefficient is used to predict the current quantized DC coefficient. The difference between the two is encoded rather than the actual value. The encoding of the 63 quantized AC coefficients does not use such prediction differencing. The zigzag sequence for the above quantized coefficients are shown below. The format shown is just for ease of understanding viewing. If the ith block is represented by and positions within each block are represented by warrant, then any coefficient in the DCT image can be represented as. Thus, in the above scheme, the order of encoding pixels for the th block is and so on. This encoding mode is called baseline sequential encoding. Baseline JPG also supports progressive encoding. While sequential encoding encodes coefficients of a single block at a time, in a zigzag manner, progressive encoding encodes similar position coefficients of all blocks in one go, followed by the next position coefficients of all blocks, and so on. So, if the image is divided into n8x8 blocks, then progressive encoding encodes for all blocks, that is, for all. This is followed by encoding coefficient of all blocks, followed by th coefficient of all blocks, then th coefficient of all blocks, and so on. It should be noted here that once all similar position coefficients have been encoded, the next position to be encoded is the one occurring next in the zigzag traversal as indicated in the figure above. It has been found that baseline progressive JPG encoding usually gives better compression as compared to baseline sequential JPG due to the ability to use different Huffman tables, see below, tailored for different frequencies on each scan or pass, which includes similar position coefficients, though the difference is not too large. In the rest of the article, it is assumed that the coefficient pattern generated is due to sequential mode. In order to encode the above-generated coefficient pattern, JPEG uses Huffman encoding. The JPEG standard provides general-purpose Huffman tables. Encoders may also choose to generate Huffman tables optimized for the actual frequency distributions in images being encoded. The process of encoding the zigzag quantized data begins with a run-length encoding explained below, where is the non-zero, quantized AC coefficient. Run length is the number of zeros that came before this non-zero AC coefficient. Size is the number of bits required to represent. Amplitude is the bit representation of. The run-length encoding works by examining each non-zero AC coefficient and determining how many zeros came before the previous AC coefficient. With this information, two symbols are created. Both run length and size rest on the same byte, meaning that each only contains 4 bits of information. The higher bits deal with the number of zeros, while the lower bits denote the number of bits necessary to encode the value of. This has the immediate implication of symbol 1 being only able to store information regarding the first 15 zeros preceding the non-zero AC coefficient. However, JPEG defines 2 special Huffman code words. One is for ending the sequence prematurely when the remaining coefficients are 0, called end of block or EOB, and another when the run of zeros goes beyond 15 before reaching a non-zero AC coefficient. In such a case where 16 zeros are encountered before a given non-zero AC coefficient, symbol 1 is encoded specially as 15, 0, 0. The overall process continues until EOB denoted by 0, 0 is reached. With this in mind, the sequence from earlier becomes 0, 2, minus 3, 1, 2, minus 3, 0, 2, minus 2, 0, 3, minus 6, 0, 2, 2, 0, 2, minus 4, 0, 1, 1, 0, 2, minus 3, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1, 0, 3, 5, 0, 1, 1, 0, 2, 2, 0, 1, minus 1, 0, 1, 1, 0, 2, 2, 5, 1, minus 1, 0, 1, minus 1, 0, 0. The first value in the matrix, minus 26, is the DC coefficient. It is not encoded the same way. See above. From here, frequency calculations are made based on occurrences of the coefficients. In our example block, most of the quantized coefficients are small numbers that are not preceded immediately by a zero coefficient. These more frequent cases will be represented by shorter code words.
Compression ratio in artifacts.
The resulting compression ratio can be varied according to need by being more or less aggressive in the divisors used in the quantization phase. 10:1 compression usually results in an image that cannot be distinguished by eye from the original. 100:1 compression is usually possible, but will look distinctly artifacted compared to the original. The appropriate level of compression depends on the use to which the image will be put. Those who use the World Wide Web may be familiar with the irregularities known as compression artifacts that appear in JPEG images, which may take the form of noise around contrasting edges, especially curves and corners, or blocky images. These are due to the quantization step of the JPEG algorithm. They are especially noticeable around sharp corners between contrasting colors. Text is a good example as it contains many such corners. The analogous artifacts in MPEG video are referred to as mosquito noise, as the resulting edge busyness and spurious dots, which change over time, resemble mosquitoes swarming around the object. These artifacts can be reduced by choosing a lower level of compression. They may be eliminated by saving an image using a lossless file format, though for photographic images this will usually result in a larger file size. The images created with ray tracing programs have noticeable blocky shapes on the terrain. Certain low-intensity compression artifacts might be acceptable when simply viewing the images, but can be emphasized if the image is subsequently processed, usually resulting in unacceptable quality. Consider the example below, demonstrating the effect of lossy compression on an edge detection processing step. Some programs allow the user to vary the amount by which individual blocks are compressed. Stronger compression is applied to areas of the image that show fewer artifacts. This way it is possible to manually reduce JPEG file size with less loss of quality. JPEG artifacts, like pixelation, are occasionally intentionally exploited for artistic purposes, as in JPEGs, by German photographer Thomas Ruff. Since the quantization stage always results in a loss of information, JPEG standard is always a lossy compression codec. Information is lost both in quantizing and rounding of the floating point numbers. Even if the quantization matrix is a matrix of ones, information will still be lost in the rounding step.
Decoding.
Decoding to display the image consists of doing all the above in reverse. Taking the DCT coefficient matrix, after adding the difference of the DC coefficient back in, and taking the entry for entry product with the quantization matrix from above results in, which closely resembles the original DCT coefficient matrix for the top left portion. The next step is to take the two-dimensional inverse DCT, a 2D type III DCT, which is given by where is the pixel row, for the integers, is the pixel column, for the integers, is defined as above, for the integers, is the reconstructed approximate coefficient at coordinates, is the reconstructed pixel value at coordinates. Rounding the output to integer values, since the original had integer values, results in an image with values, still shifted down by 128. And adding 128 to each entry. This is the decompressed subimage. In general, the decompression process may produce values outside of the original input range of. If this occurs, the decoder needs to clip the output values, keep them within that range to prevent overflow when storing the decompressed image with the original bit depth. The decompressed subimage can be compared to the original subimage, also see images to the right, by taking the difference, original, uncompressed, results in the following error values. With an average absolute error of about 5 values per pixels, that is. The error is most noticeable in the bottom left corner where the bottom left pixel becomes darker than the pixel to its immediate right.
Required precision.
The encoding description in the JPEG standard does not fix the precision needed for the output compressed image. However, the JPEG standard, and the similar MPEG standards, include some precision requirements for the decoding, including all parts of the decoding process, variable length decoding, inverse DCT, dequantization, renormalization of outputs. The output from the reference algorithm must not exceed a maximum 1 bit of difference for each pixel component, low mean square error over each 8x8 pixel block, very low mean error over each 8x8 pixel block, very low mean square error over the whole image, extremely low mean error over the whole image. These assertions are tested on a large set of randomized input images, to handle the worst cases. The former IEEE 1180-1990 standard contained some similar precision requirements. The precision has a consequence on the implementation of decoders, and it is critical because some encoding processes, notably used for encoding sequences of images like MPEG, need to be able to construct, on the encoder side, a reference decoded image. In order to support 8-bit precision per pixel component output, dequantization and inverse DCT transforms are typically implemented with at least 14-bit precision in optimized decoders.
Effects of JPEG compression.
JPEG compression artifacts blend well into photographs with detailed non-uniform textures, allowing higher compression ratios. Notice how a higher compression ratio first affects the high-frequency textures in the upper left corner of the image, and how the contrasting lines become more fuzzy. The very high compression ratio severely affects the quality of the image, although the overall colors and image form are still recognizable. However, the precision of colors suffer less, for a human eye, than the precision of contours, based on luminance. This justifies the fact that images should be first transformed in a color model separating the luminance from the chromatic information, before subsampling the chromatic planes, which may also use lower quality quantization, in order to preserve the precision of the luminance plane with more information bits.
Sample photographs.
For information, the uncompressed 24-bit RGB bitmap image below, 73,242 pixels, would require 219,726 bytes, excluding all other information headers. The file sizes indicated below include the internal JPG information headers and some metadata. For highest quality images, Q equals 100, about 8.25 bits per color pixel is required. On grayscale images, a minimum of 6.5 bits per pixel is enough. A comparable Q equals 100 quality color information requires about 25% more encoded bits. The highest quality image below, Q equals 100, is encoded at 9 bits per color pixel. The medium quality image, Q equals 25, uses 1 bit per color pixel. For most applications, the quality factor should not go below 0.75 bit per pixel, Q equals 12.5, as demonstrated by the low quality image. The image at lowest quality uses only 0.13 bit per pixel, and displays very poor color. This is useful when the image will be displayed in a significantly scaled down size. The medium quality photo uses only 4.3% of the storage space required for the uncompressed image, but has little noticeable loss of detail or visible artifacts. However, once a certain threshold of compression is passed, compressed images show increasingly visible defects. See the article on rate distortion theory for a mathematical explanation of this threshold effect. A particular limitation of JPG in this regard is its non-overlapped 8x8 block transform structure. More modern designs such as JPG 2000 and JPG-XR exhibit a more graceful degradation of quality as the bit usage decreases, by using transforms with a larger spatial extent for the lower frequency coefficients and by using overlapping transform basis functions.
Lossless further compression.
From 2004 to 2008, new research has emerged on ways to further compress the data contained in JPG images without modifying the represented image. This has applications in scenarios where the original image is only available in JPG format, and its size needs to be reduced for archival or transmission. Standard general-purpose compression tools cannot significantly compress JPG files. Typically, such schemes take advantage of improvements to the naive scheme for coding DCT coefficients, which fails to take into account correlations between magnitudes of adjacent coefficients in the same block, correlations between magnitudes of the same coefficient in adjacent blocks, correlations between magnitudes of the same coefficient block in different channels. The DC coefficients when taken together resemble a downscale version of the original image multiplied by a scaling factor. Well-known schemes for lossless coding of continuous tone images can be applied, achieving somewhat better compression than the Huffman-coded DPCM used in JPG. Some standard but rarely used options already exist in JPG to improve the efficiency of coding DCT coefficients, the arithmetic coding option, and the progressive coding option, which produces lower bit rates because values for each coefficient are coded independently, and each coefficient has a significantly different distribution. Modern methods have improved on these techniques by reordering coefficients to group coefficients of larger magnitude together, using adjacent coefficients and blocks to predict new coefficient values, dividing blocks or coefficients up among a small number of independently coded models based on their statistics and adjacent values, and most recently, by decoding blocks, predicting subsequent blocks in the spatial domain, and then encoding these to generate predictions for DCT coefficients. Typically, such methods can compress existing JPG files between 15 and 25%, and for JPGs compressed at low-quality settings, can produce improvements of up to 65%. A freely available tool called pjpeg is based on the 2007 paper Improved Redundancy Reduction for JPG files.
Derived formats for stereoscopic 3D. JPG stereoscopic.
JPEG Stereoscopic, JPS, extension JPS, is a JPEG-based format for stereoscopic images. It has a range of configurations stored in the JPEG APP3 marker field, but usually contains one image of double width, representing two images of identical size and cross-eyed, that is left frame on the right half of the image and vice versa, side-by-side arrangement. This file format can be viewed as a JPEG without any special software, or can be processed for rendering in other modes.
JPEG multi-picture format.
JPEG multi-picture format, MPO, extension PO, is a JPEG-based format for multi-view images. It contains two or more JPEG files concatenated together. There are also special Exif fields describing its purpose. This is used by the Fujifilm FinePix Real 3D W1 camera, Panasonic Lumix DMCT-Z20, DMCT-Z30 and DMCT-S4, FT4, Sony DSC-HX7V, HTC Evo 3D, the JVC GYHMZ1 UAVC HDMVC extension camcorder and by the Nintendo 3DS for its 3D camera.
Patent issues.
In 2002, Forgent Networks asserted that it owned and would enforce patent rights on the JPEG technology, arising from a patent that had been filed on October 27, 1986, and granted on October 6, 1987, U.S. Patent 4,698,672. The announcement created a fear reminiscent of Unisys' attempts to assert its rights over the GIF image compression standard. The JPEG Committee investigated the patent claims in 2002 and were of the opinion that they were invalidated by prior art. Others also concluded that Forgent did not have a patent that covered JPEG. Nevertheless, between 2002 and 2004, Forgent was able to obtain about $105 million by licensing their patent to some 30 companies. In April 2004, Forgent sued 31 other companies to enforce further license payments. In July of the same year, a consortium of 21 large computer companies filed a countersuit, with the goal of invalidating the patent. In addition, Microsoft launched a separate lawsuit against Forgent in April 2005. In February 2006, the United States Patent and Trademark Office agreed to re-examine Forgent's JPEG patent at the request of the Public Patent Foundation. On May 26, 2006, the USPTO found the patent invalid based on prior art. The USPTO also found that Forgent knew about the prior art and did not tell the Patent Office, making any appeal to reinstate the patent highly unlikely to succeed. Forgent also possesses a similar patent granted by the European Patent Office in 1994, though it is unclear how enforceable it is. As of October 27, 2006, the U.S. patent's 20-year term appears to have expired, and in November 2006, Forgent agreed to abandon enforcement of patent claims against use of the JPEG standard. The JPEG Committee has as one of its explicit goals that their standards, in particular their baseline methods, be implementable without payment of license fees, and they have secured appropriate license rights for their upcoming JPEG 2000 standard from over 20 large organizations. Beginning in August 2007, another company, Global Patent Holdings, LLC, claimed that its patent, U.S. Patent 5,253,341 issued in 1993, is infringed by the downloading of JPEG images on either a website or through email. If not invalidated, this patent could apply to any website that displays JPEG images. The patent emerged in July 2007 following a 7-year re-examination by the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office in which all of the original claims of the patent were revoked, but an additional claim, Claim 17, was confirmed. In its first two lawsuits following the re-examination, both filed in Chicago, Illinois, Global Patent Holdings sued the Green Bay Packers, CDW, Motorola, Apple, Orbitz, OfficeMax, Caterpillar, Kraft and Peapod as defendants. A third lawsuit was filed on December 5, 2007 in South Florida against ADT Security Services, AutoNation, Florida Crystals Corporation, Here USA, MovieTickets.com, Aachen Financial Corporation and Tire Kingdom. and a fourth lawsuit on January 8, 2008 in South Florida against the Boca Raton Resort and Club. A fifth lawsuit was filed against Global Patent Holdings in Nevada. That lawsuit was filed by Zappos.com, Incorporated, which was allegedly threatened by Global Patent Holdings, and seeks a judicial declaration that the 341 patent is invalid and not infringed. Global Patent Holdings had also used the 341 patent to sue or threaten outspoken critics of broad software patents, including Gregory Aaronian and the anonymous operator of a website blog known as a patent troll tracker. On December 21, 2007, patent lawyer Vernon Francison of Chicago asked the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office to re-examine the sole remaining claim of the 341 patent on the basis of new prior art. On March 5, 2008, the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office agreed to re-examine the 341 patent, finding that the new prior art raised substantial new questions regarding the patent's validity. In light of the re-examination, the accused infringers in 4 of the 5 pending lawsuits have filed motions to suspend, stay, their cases until completion of the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office's review of the 341 patent. On April 23, 2008, a judge presiding over the 2 lawsuits in Chicago, Illinois granted the motions in those cases. On July 22, 2008, the Patent Office issued the first office action of the second re-examination, finding the claim invalid based on 19 separate grounds. On November 24, 2009, a re-examination certificate was issued canceling all claims. Beginning in 2011 and continuing as of early 2013, an entity known as Princeton Digital Image Corporation, based in eastern Texas, began suing large numbers of companies for alleged infringement of U.S. Patent No. 4,813,056, U.S. Patent 4,813,056. Princeton claims that the Jpeg image compression standard infringes the 056 patent and has sued large numbers of websites, retailers, camera and device manufacturers and resellers. The patent was originally owned and assigned to General Electric. The patent expired in December 2007, but Princeton has sued large numbers of companies for past infringement of this patent. Under U.S. patent laws, a patent owner can sue for past infringement up to 6 years before the filing of a lawsuit, so Princeton could theoretically have continued suing companies until December 2013. As of March 2013, Princeton had suits pending in New York and Delaware against more than 55 companies. General Electric's involvement in the suit is unknown, although court records indicate that it assigned the patent to Princeton in 2009 and retained certain rights in the patent.
Standards.
Here are some examples of standards created by ISO IEC JTC1SC29 Working Group 1, WG1, which includes the Joint Photographic Experts Group and Joint Bi-Level Image Experts Group. JPEG, Lossy and Lossless, ITUTT81, ISO IEC 10918-1, JPEG Extensions, ITUTT84, JPEG-LS, Lossless, Improved, ITUTT87, ISO IEC 14495-1, JBIG, Lossless, Bi-Level Pictures, Fax ITUTT82, ISO IEC 11544, JBIG2, Bi-Level Pictures, ITUTT88, ISO IEC 14492, JPEG 2000, ITUTT800, ISO IEC 15444-1, JPEG 2000 Extensions, ITUTT801, JPEG XR, formerly called HD Photo prior to standardization, ITUTT832, ISO IEC 29199-2.